All right. So a little bit later than usual today for the live, like checking in with everyone. These the questions that seem to come up on Wednesdays are pretty fantastic. And so we're just kind of stepping into that a little bit more and seeing if there's anybody out there in the world Let's see if anybody shows up. Man, there's been a lot of ripe insights today in the midst of playing in the realm of context, thoughts, infinite potential, innocence, the manufactured need for stability, these perceived imbalances, conversations about quantum science and physics, things like that. You know, the one beautiful thing about non-duality, not that it's even really a thing. I mean, it seems more honest or earnest to say reality as best can be perceived or noticed or experienced is it really does seem to fit every potential framework. I guess we could speak a little bit about frameworks. There's the spiritual framework, of course. That's usually the framework in which it seems to be applied. There's also practical framework, relationships, sexuality, money, those pieces. There's a biological framework, biochemical framework, scientific framework. It's pretty remarkable. And the application seems to be pretty clear there, that seems like there's this ultimate sense of how do a lot of non-dual gurus speak something about ultimate reality? But even then, it's like coming to a sense of a conclusion or certainty around that also doesn't seem quite authentic. It doesn't seem quite it. We taking a stance at all is tricky here because even though there are apparent stances, it's really about some kind of theme of engagement. That part seems to be kind of crucial or key. So the engagement would be something along the lines of people will often express these things in sessions like, wow, man, I got really interested in spirituality in my 20s. And it was just so mind blowing, all these things that I was learning and reading about. And it's a very human experience and a very mind oriented experience to point to the object of what seems to be experienced and miss the gap. We could call that gap emptiness, but the gap has this essence of engagement. It has this essence of attention. It has this essence of relationship. And we miss that it's not about necessarily the object that's being engaged with or seemingly engaged with, but instead it's the sense of curiosity that seems to arise in the midst of that engagement. It's essentially very viscerally and palpably stepping into the energetics, we could say, of the unknown. It's the curiosity and not necessarily having an answer to live in that space, which seems to be pervasive here in this reality. That curiosity seems to be everything. Oftentimes, an insight comes up that it's not about the question, it's not about the answer, it's about the engagement. But we could also put that another way. It's about living in the question, but not about the words of the question, about the energetics of the question. So on a really, really kind of transcendental level, it's to exist in the curiosity itself, the question, without needing some kind of mutual exclusivity with an answer, with a platform, an arbitrary place of pausing or a knowing. I think in that experience that we've all had, and maybe you can reflect on something recent, or even if there seems to be a memory about childhood, you probably have something really visceral in your experience about essentially playing, engaging, exploring this reality with no need for guide rails or conclusions or rules, just an open exploration. We could even look at daydreaming. The essence of daydreaming and meditation, very much the same. It's to allow experience and attention to essentially present itself to us instead of having a rigid approach that comes through a conceptual framework. Some cultures even encourage daydreaming. I think it's primarily Japan, and I'm not sure if it's the whole culture or for certain companies. So please forgive if this is inaccurate. But years ago, I read that some corporations actually require their employees in Japan to spend time daydreaming, to just not engage with anything, to essentially take their focus of attention and let it dissolve into a width of attention. So without creating too much terminology, just wanted to point out that there is a seemingly very crucial difference in experience between focus and attention. And it's not to say we reject focus by any means, yet it is to notice that in the midst of focus, we tend to be quite identified with whatever that focus seems to be, that aperture, the laser of focus. We tend to essentially reject massive amounts of experience in those. And I know it can be kind of tricky, and I know there seems like there can be some contradictions along the way. It seems like the first thing that can be really useful is noticing that hyper focus of attention. That is probably the best way to describe identification. It's just a hyper focus of attention with a reflective evaluation or a justification or a sense of anticipation or expectation built into all that. They're all somewhat related there. And then finding ways to loosen the aperture of that focus. And that's essentially what practices are best for. Meditation often helps us loosen the aperture of the focus into thought. And then attention begins to essentially widen or spontaneously arise in seemingly different locations or different experiences, a cornucopia, if you will, of experience. Thought is excellent at giving us a sense of focus in attention. So a lot of the pointings, on the So Awake channel will say, move that focus of attention into sensation and bring focus there. It actually seems to make a lot of sense, because if attention is used to being focused in one direction or another, then we might as well not fight that movement and instead begin to kind of show it something else. It's like a diversion, essentially, not a distraction necessarily, but a diversion. To divert attention, it's like judo or aikido or whatever the martial art in particular that is about using the momentum and moving like water, using the momentum, not completely stopping the momentum, but essentially diverting that momentum into something that isn't thought. So moving a focus of attention into sensation begins to essentially show us that attention exists outside of thought. And then from there, we can have a lot of spontaneous experiences. We can have a width of attention that shows up. The best way to essentially simplify, distill the I am into language is just to say an infinite width of attention. That's the I am. And the best way to distill thought or identity or ego is a tight, condensed focus of attention. The space of transition as a human being seems to be oriented in sensations that we're perceiving in the body. Some of us will call these sensations physical sensations, but there's really actually no way to verify that it's even physical. It just seems to be a perceptual attention. But in the meantime, if it feels physical or if it feels palpable or feels real, that stepping away from the focus of attention from thought into something else is akin to the visual field in which we're experiencing now. If you're looking directly at the screen, the focus of attention tends to go where the eyes are pointing directly ahead. But if you allow yourself to soften and open the aperture just slightly, you'll notice that there is a lot of information right here in the visual field itself. A lot of it that we tend to somehow seemingly disregard through a focus of attention. This is the essence of identification. This is also why the visual field for some people can be a little more challenging, because there actually is an identified aspect of vision. There's belief behind vision that we are seeing objects over there, that we aren't actually directly connected or interacted with that. Underneath that belief, we start to realize that attention meets attention, and we cannot really determine the point of where attention is meeting attention. It seems like it's already done by the time we essentially investigate that. Not really sure where all this is coming from at the moment, but these moments of inspired, intuitive insight are really kind of, it starts as something that could be perceived as a sensational experience that seems to emanate from a centerless center, infinitely outward, like a reverberation, like a resonance, like a vibration. And then upon further investigating and further kind of conferring with that, it seems like it can also be like this distance collapsing or time collapsing experience. You know, Adyashanti's pointing where he says, there is no one else. This is an inside game. That is so crucially true. That whatever our object of attention is, for a long time, is like the head of the serpent on the Ouroboros. It is consuming everything. It's outward extended. There's an exertion of energy in what appears or feels to be an outward sense, like a distance, a moving away from, an experience of being a satellite, maybe, to something. A pursuit, a hunt, a seeking, a fighting, a desperate act of moving away from something else. It's a compensation. It's creating a reference just in motion. And then if we turn that flashlight of attention inward, which seems like there can be some agency with that, at least initially. But as we begin to investigate those layers, that starts to flip upside down and right side up again. It becomes very paradoxical. That turning of the flashlight inward begins to reveal something else. The something else is kind of the whole point of this. Because we're moving beyond knowledge, the something else is not known. And maybe, as mentioned before, it seems as if joy is only discovered in the experience of the unknown. It's one of the most palpable reasons we enjoy nature, at least some of us. When we're in nature, no matter if we've been to the spot that we're currently at before, there's a sense of wide openness, wide open curiosity, wide open exploration. Nothing is ever the same. There's so much information in the nature itself. I mean, if you look at each individual leaf or needle on the pine tree, all the sounds and the animals moving around, that we just become absolutely perceptive and open to just this pervasive information. It's interesting that way. That by itself shows something, that we, in maybe some environments, are absolutely capable of being fully engaged and basically opening the antenna of experience as wide as possible. That's kind of cool to be able to have those experiences. Some other people, it's maybe in the midst of doing some sort of physical activity. Somebody the other day was sharing, in the midst of stacking wood, that there was no thought. That's the essence of chop wood, carry water there. There's no resistance. There's no ambition. It's just is. And it's like being so fully immersed in experience itself, instead of the modeling of experience, which is the reflection of thought, the concept. It's all modeling. but being immersed in the experience itself, there is seemingly always something new. Nothing ever has an essence of the same. The mind, what it likes to do is create, it likes to smooth edges. It's the equivalent of taking something that's analog, like music, like a vinyl record or something, and digitizing it. In the process of digitizing a vinyl record, there's actually certain sounds that are not transferred. It's simplified in a way or condensed. It's interesting that way. That's what the mind seems to be doing. It's like digitizing our experiences into some kind of heuristic model. And if we rely on that heuristic alone, we are actually kind of doomed to reject the experience, the reality, the nature of our truth more often. It becomes imbalanced. We rely on a model instead of experiencing wholeness. That's kind of crucial here. And I know we rail on thoughts a lot. Pointers, you probably all know it. It's probably, there might be even a point where you're just like, I'm sick of hearing this is all about thought. But sometimes recontextualizing what's happening can start to instigate a little curiosity. It seems like that's what a pointer is really best suited for. And there's a lot of seemingly facets of someone who points or guides or teaches or whatever the term you want to use is. It's to essentially reinvigorate curiosity so that curiosity carries us forward in the immersive experience of our reality, whatever that may be. So hopefully these particular videos, they don't stand as a noun. They don't stand as some kind of edifice. Instead, they are more like a spark to be a catalyst for your curiosity, to light you up, because the truth can only be discovered in direct experience. Even in this particular video or any videos that anyone's ever put out or a book, there's no truth in the book. There's no truth in the video. It's a modeling, it's a finger pointing, and it may be a little bit closer than some other models, yet it's all in essence, it's all in resonance. It's felt. And if there's a sense of inspiration or curiosity that arises, carpe momentum, jump on the train of curiosity and see for yourself. I know some other particular, there's like gurus and teachers and groups out there that almost infer a reliance on the teacher. That's just disingenuous. There's nothing anyone can have that isn't absolutely ubiquitous for everyone. And so hopefully whatever seems to bring all of you back here to engage, to play, to become curious, is just the resonance itself, just to essentially tap into something that is seemingly endlessly, infinitely curious, infinitely innocent, and to play. But if you turn it into an object that you must rely on, then I promise you this, any of this, any one, whether it be Angelo, Adyashanti, Ekhart Tolle, Nissargadatta, or any particular teacher, that there's a displacement occurring there. And even as someone who's pointing, it's quite aware that can happen. There's no need to displace, but that doesn't mean you also have to be removed. It's interesting. You can be involved. The resonance is clear, and there's nothing of solid nature in the pointing itself. The pointing is just the spark that ignites the curiosity that's already here. That's the essence of the moon. The finger that points to the moon is right here. Right here. It's an inside game. That's what all these fingers point to. There's also other elements of encouragement and some elements of validation in these things. These things are not hard to participate in because, the path itself has an infinite variety, and to swing the pendulum too hard oftentimes can kind of actually become a disservice. sometimes a pointing can become too direct. If somebody's in the midst of some kind of very acute, intense suffering, and somebody says, there's no you, there's no suffering, you're not really feeling this, have a good day, that doesn't seem to do much for us. So there's also this transition through our humanness. I sense that that's often what you resonate with here. There is an ease in the humanness, the earnestness, the authenticity of what it is to be, seemingly anyway, human. And it's so interesting, even the Buddha points this way. He refers to humanness as self, not this illusory self, but like true self, true nature, these kinds of things. He says that in the engagement of a self that we find somehow that is a wide open experience, that there essentially is nothing contained. There is not a self there. It's interesting. I actually had just read that for the first time the other day. There was even I could probably find it on the phone. I can share the exact quote, actually. And I looked it up, and it's actually, who knows if Buddha ever actually said it. But the wisdom seems to be ubiquitous and universal in that, which is really beautiful. Let's see if I can find it real quick. I don't see it. I'll post it. I'll post it on one of the social media channels. Also, just wanted to, since that came up, invite everybody to check out the Instagram page and the Facebook page. And also, Eric Ireland and I are currently in the midst of exploring ways to collaborate. And so it looks like a lot of that's probably going to be shared on social media. If you already use social media, just come join us. If not, no big deal. I think the links are available on the YouTube page too, if you don't know where they are. But it's So Awake. I think both of them are SOO Awake is the final hyphen caption or whatever on there. So let's just put it this way: there's these aspects of authenticity. Whatever your truest self is, it can't be known ahead of time. Knowledge always gives us the sense that we know something about ourselves in a continuous and also predictive way. That's not what we're pointing to when it comes to authenticity. Authenticity has nothing to do with knowing who you are, not here, not intellectually. Authenticity is absolutely a felt experience, but it's not like a singular aspect of a felt experience. In other words, we could easily describe it as a spectrum. There's this intuitive feeling. Intuition is crucial. And what it seems like that intuition can be primarily revealing for us is a barometer of dissonance. That's almost the best way to put it. It's like an antenna of alignment, ease, effort, and dissonance. Now, it doesn't mean that just because you're experiencing dissonance to move away from something either. It's literally just starting to reveal where the no exists, where the rejection of experience exists. So in the moment of experiencing intuition, sometimes a dissonance is an engagement with the dissonance. Other times we move away. We don't have to have a rule of thumb here. We don't have to have a formula. But it does seem that intuition is pretty clearly a feeling that's consisting of motion, something that's coming up and just instantly engaged with. We find ourselves in some sort of dynamic action. If we live a life of intuition, we tend not to live a life of agency. It's kind of remarkable too, because it feels like an incredible risk for anyone who's coming in contact with that to let go of the decision-oriented mind and instead move into something that is absolutely unknown. The intuition is always unknown, but we just go along for the ride anyway. It's like constantly asking us to dance, and so we do. There's creativity. Creativity isn't necessarily what you think it is. It's a spontaneous act of creation. Maybe not act, that's not quite it. It's a spontaneous expression of creation. That's what creativity seems to be. There's sexuality. That's a part of our truest nature. That doesn't necessarily mean sexual preference. It just means the willingness to engage with our creative nature in the venue of sex and sexuality. And that's actually something that isn't often spoken about in the spiritual realm. It's interesting how that tends to take a back seat, sexuality, um, mainly because it seems to be an absolutely crucial aspect of our discovery of authenticity. And maybe there can be some videos about that. I know it definitely pushes a boundary, it pushes a line when we start talking about sexuality, especially in our culture. But there is something seemingly crucial about that type of engagement. Sexuality doesn't have to include anyone else either. It's just an energetic expression that's very akin to creativity, spontaneous arising. These things are pretty juicy. There's also, of course, curiosity. Curiosity is kind of like this pervasive force that seems to illustrate our innocence. Curiosity always arises from what is uncaused because it doesn't have a frame of reference. Curiosity doesn't have an answer. That part can be tricky because when it comes to the mind, there is a fundamental belief in cause and effect. And in fact, the mind is so pervasive that since there's a cause and effect nature, seemingly, through how we perceive things through the mind, that we don't realize that our projection of experience in terms of the pattern seeking from the mind is actually all that cause and effect truly is. It's just the way that the mind is perceiving reality. So to move away from cause and effect, in other words, explore outside of that box, we start to find that curiosity doesn't have a reason. It's uncaused. Innocence doesn't have a reason. Creativity doesn't have a reason. It doesn't have a reason. It's not coming from anything. It's not going anywhere. It just is here. Same thing with intuition. There's no cause. There's no effect. In that, we could easily say that the question and the answer are not mutually exclusive. The answer is irrelevant. We could say in the midst of an experience, we could just frame it this way. Just be with the effect. There is no cause. What a lot of people will find themselves doing is searching for a reason why they feel a certain way, maybe something that happened in their past that caused this. If you've ever done that, and if you've done it a lot, you realize probably that even if you do find an apparent cause, it doesn't change the experience by any means at all. It still must be experienced. So instead of going on the journey of distraction, constantly looking for a cause, the pointing is just to be with the effect. Just be entirely with the effect. I mean, when it rains outside, we don't go looking for the cause of what caused it to rain. Let what is above also be what is below. These experiences that we have, we don't need to find a cause. We just be with them as they are. And this is the essence of freedom. We're not going to ever be able to stop the weather. It doesn't even make sense. Same thing with feeling. You cannot control it. You cannot stop it. It cannot be modified. It just is. So instead of stepping into a place of control, just a place of allowance, stillness shows us everything. The flower blooms as the flower blooms, and that's it. There's nothing we can do to make the flower bloom, but we can rest with it and enjoy the blooming. That's what this is too. And then other aspects of authenticity seem to show up as courage to engage. Oftentimes we're faced with something that there's like a hell no there. And most of the time, intuitively, I would say it's actually counterintuitive in its truest form, but it seems intuitive for us that if we run into something that feels like it hurts or it's uncomfortable, then we want to go the other direction. But this is not the same experiences of putting our hand on a hot stove. These experiences are so abstract that it will teach you all about suffering if you just choose to drop all the way into what feels challenging or uncomfortable or energetically painful. I mean, you can call it pain, but in reality, there's nothing there. It's just a sensation. It seems like that requires courage. These are all things that every single one of us have built in. And every personality has an engagement with these aspects of authenticity to some degree. But what I'm pointing to here is engage with all of these things as they arise as thoroughly as possible, testing those thresholds. And courage and curiosity, those two, seem to be a pretty crucial part in diving into what feels really challenging for us, what feels painful or difficult. When you reach the bottom of a sensation and find nothing there, it's pretty hard to essentially be controlled in experience by what's being felt. In other words, if you can be with anything as it is, where's the problem? What does it make you do? How does it make you compensate? What do you have to find out here to fix it? All that context dissolves there. But there does seem to be a fundamental belief of cause and effect with thoughts and feelings, and a fundamental belief that this sensation is what the thoughts are telling me. It's a very powerful assumption. Man, this is definitely sadness. I'm definitely feeling sad. And what we're doing is we're looking for correlating evidence in the midst of a sensation. But upon further investigation, we cannot pick up sadness. We cannot pick up frustration. We cannot throw anxiety across the room. These things have to be purely interpreted. They have to be purely assumed. Seems like the best way to kind of break the lamination of thought and sensation is to rest in the feeling anyway. This is just anyway. I'm going to do it anyway. No matter what the thoughts are telling me, no matter how intense it seems to be. Because when we can break this pattern of attempting to survive what we feel, then we're no longer attempting to survive what we feel. Prove to yourself that there is nothing that you feel that can hurt you. Can't hurt you at all. There's nothing threatening in what's being felt at all. And you can prove that in any given moment, all the time. And that often looks like a regular engagement, this broad experience, and sometimes acutely the narrows of experience, the diving all the way down. And it does seem like one of the final aspects of authenticity, this human experience, is selfless giving. Selfless giving isn't really what we're doing externally. It's not necessarily money we're giving. It can be acts of service in these things. It can be expressed that way. But what selfless giving truly is an absolute vulnerability and openness. It's a nakedness, nothing hiding. That's selfless giving. We could call it vulnerability. But it is a giving because there's nothing to protect. So it seems like there's a radiance, something radiating like this, perpetually, in and out, unobstructed, no resistances, no obstacles, freedom. And sometimes, as mentioned before, that shows up as like an act of service or a giving of something or anything along those lines. But from a place of absolute vulnerability and openness, it's effortless to meet everything and everyone exactly where it arises. Pretty hard to have resistance in absolute opening. This is why we like to fall in love. This is why we like to do drugs together and drink and these things, because it can numb some of those mechanisms of protection enough that we start to open up together and we start to have synchronized experience. We start to realize that we are connected beyond what we can intellectually perceive. This is why we like to have sex. This is a part of that sexuality. Maybe some of you out there have experienced that, but I cannot tell where I begin and you end, or you begin and I end. There's a meshing of no contained self in these experiences. There was a dream a few nights ago, and in the dream, a voice said, "At some point, we'll all just wake up as God." Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of the point. We realize we are just this, and that these seemingly motions and dramas that erupt, there can be perspective shift. One of the things I used to love years ago is in the midst of battling with what felt like very intense depression. Every once in a while, I would throw on one of those documentaries of how the universe was made or something, and just like it gives you a perspective of the vastness of what seems to be here, and how inconsequential all of these little bickers truly are. It makes me wonder if there's like an analog to the ants. Do you think ants have drama? I mean, of course, we wouldn't be able to perceive it, but do you think they're, running into each other and they're like yelling at each other and fighting and screaming? Do you think they worry about paying taxes? Do you think they're always looking for a better house or a nicer car? Those things are funny because it doesn't seem so. There's so much here that's just constantly revealing itself. Like it's like seeing behind curtain after curtain after curtain, and it's not an earned experience either. It's not. It doesn't require work, but the initial experience does seem to be a little bit of effort to step into what we feel because we're essentially kind of moving outside of a pattern which has kind of gathered our attention and gathered some kind of momentum. Breaking patterns is so juicy. All patterns, explore them all. I mean, even the mundane. Well, every night I floss my teeth, skip the floss. Does that create some kind of existential crisis? It can happen. Experiment with everything, especially the things that seem inconsequential. See if anything's there. If there's nothing there, then I suppose that pattern or that heuristic has a practical function that doesn't seem to take a personal tone. But these personal tones can seemingly be hidden in some of the most mundane experiences. One of them tends to be boredom. I hear that often. Oh man, just bored. I'm boredom. What is the sensation that seems to accompany boredom? What seems to come before? A lot of people will discover restlessness there. And then there's a subtext to the restlessness, like a subconscious subtext of anything but this. Got to do something else. Got to find stimulation. Can't feel this, can't feel this, can't feel this. Like a desperation. So the more often you rest in that sense of restlessness, more often you touch it, incorporate it, play with it, move with it, the less likely it will seemingly have a compensatory effect. Do we really need to compensate for what we feel? How has that worked out for you? Instead of compensating, just become it. And probably, as mentioned before, we start to realize we are what we feel, but it's not just that. It seems to be like that first glimpse of, oh, wait, I am that. And then the dam seems to break and it spills over into everything. I am experience. I am this. Even saying I am this gets silly. This is I am this. What it feels like all the time. Is there anyone here to like, this is just an instrument vibrating. That's it. Just an instrument. Another tool, just like the mind is a tool. A tool for play, a tool for some sort of seeming interaction, but inconsequentially so. We have to have a sense of meaning to have consequence. We have to have a sense of value or containment to have consequence. That message can be dangerous for someone who's not quite ready or willing to go all the way. Because to tell someone who's very much ego identified that there is no consequence, for them to live in such a way probably would look like causing quite a bit of external harm. But even then, maybe that's also perfect. The no consequence comes down to what you think your life is. That's not it. You don't have a life. The expiration date that seems to be looming over most of us, this sense of death. Embrace that. That's the whole point here. There's nothing that we need to be desperately preserving all the time. But even in a real palpable way, watch this really interesting interview. Alex Honnold, he's the guy, I think, that scaled El Capitan, free solo. And he was talking about fear and the value of fear. And it's so true that the experience of fear that we experience, most of us as modern humans, has nothing to do with any tangible or credible threat. You probably heard it here before. But where's the bear? Where's the bear? Metaphor, of course. And he says that, free soloing all these mountain tops and getting into kind of sketchy situations or having a short slip, like that type of fear is a lot more palpable because there is a credible and an immediate threat there. And then when he goes to the airport to fly somewhere and he sees everybody scampering around and having these huge anxiety and fear responses about making their flights or gathering their luggage and all these things, he feels utterly, completely at peace. That's a layer peeled right there. And that keeps going. What is there to fear? Prove it. That's the point. Fear barrier does seem to be a big deal for the majority of human beings. Strangely enough, it didn't really show up as fear here. Don't know why. Maybe it was because there was a conditioning around fear that had existed for a long time through growing up in a really traumatic way. But instead, it showed up just as intense in a form of sorrow, just a sense of never ending sadness, like holding the sorrow of all of humankind since the dawn of time. And realizing that even that couldn't kill me. I mean, not physically anyway, but maybe something does kind of dissolve and die. That which wants to hold on, that which wants to create frameworks and barriers and senses of separation and patterning and cause and effect experiences. But even in the midst of some kind of ego death, it's not like we're ever done. We don't ever want to be done. This is perpetual transformation, metamorphosis. We're just constantly changing with this environment. We are the environment. There is no separation. There's no separation between head and heart either. These things start to become really clear that it's collapsed. It's all together. But that doesn't mean contained. That's the tricky part. You can't visualize this. You can't imagine it. You can't know it. You can't predict it. But you can immediately, somehow, immediately be it. So please, wow, this is one hell of a conversation. Just realized, not even a conversation, just jabbering. Please get into these intense experiences. Also get into what seems to be joy. And don't let the second opinion influence the engagement. Live a life of immersion. Move away from the modeling of your experience and be in the actual thing and just see how deep that rabbit hole goes. Please. There's no goal here or vision, although this seems objectively true. If every human being took this path of reconciliation in earnest exploration and went completely into the interior, that the amount of pain that spills over into external experiences would all but be eliminated. Fighting, conflict, murder, death, rape, all of these things would cease because they're just acts of compensation for something else. That's all that it's ever been. It's predicating itself on a feeling that we have concluded that we don't like. But how the hell do you know? How do you know? Prove it. Take the stance of proving every thought, but with no added defiance, with no added resistance. It's just objective, prove it. It's like if somebody says, well, it's raining outside. We just walk to the window and look. Not because we don't trust them, but because we're engaging directly in our experience. Let that be, that's a primary practice. It's not even a practice. That's like fundamental existence. The thoughts are simply suggesting. The engagement is verifying to some degree. We don't verify to come to a conclusion either, by the way. We verify because it steps us naturally and kind of effortlessly into an experience of curiosity. The prove it is just curious. Oh yeah, let me see. It's almost like the universe is sharing this fruit, manna, some kind of food, some delicious food, and somebody takes a bite and goes, "Oh my God, that's delicious," and somebody else is looking over and going, "Wait, let me see," and then they take a bite. It's just like that. The thought is suggesting, attention is moving immediately into direct experience. If that is a continuous engagement with no delay, with no break, you will start to see that thought itself has no impact. There's no substance. And that will definitely start guiding toward the body. And it's the Father through the Son into the great I Am, the Holy Spirit, this gap of curiosity and innocence. And then from there can be a death. There can be a rebirth, a death, rebirth. A lot of people have had questions about no self. No self is a realization. It's not a platform. And in that dissolution, that subject meeting object, there's no experience, there's no one, there's nothing. It is indecipherable from death, but it's not a permanent experience. We immediately are reborn. And you've probably heard this with breath work and other things, but it is very much like a rebirthing. And maybe all that really is just like a massive resetting of um, of a theme of experience, of a knowledge, of expectations. Who knows? But the point is, nothing inhabits anything else. It's all fundamentally the same. Consider your reality a clay. And every once in a while, a chunk of clay will come off and form itself into like a flamingo. And then another chunk of clay will come off and form itself into an apple. And holding those two apparent objects gives a sense of maybe some contrast or some comparison, some sort of opposition or separation. But if we become still enough and we look closer, we find it is made of the same thing fundamentally. It is fundamentally the same. The essence is the same. This is kind of what our emptinesses form, and formed emptiness begins to reveal. What's the difference? What's the difference? It's all just stardust. We know that scientifically. So anyway, wow, this was an interesting talk. Thank you guys for sitting with me. I have a session coming up. Hi, Jade. Francisca, Jennifer, nice to see you. Kathy, hello. The mind is an instrument of torture. Let me just, before I go, one recommendation. The mind can seem like an instrument of torture, but that's only because of the co-opted nature of sensation and thought. Thoughts feel personal when they seem laminated in our sensational space. The mind is just objectively making suggestions. That's it. The quality of those suggestions don't exist. In other words, even if it's like, hey, maybe you should kill yourself, those thoughts come up a lot for people. It's just a suggestion. It doesn't mean anything. Here's what's crazy about the identity. It first starts attempting to protect the body when we're young, and then it starts to take a tone of protecting itself. That's the shocking part. That's where thoughts of suicide are coming in. It's attempting to protect itself. It's attempting to be right about something. The identity isn't contained. The identity is shared amongst all human beings. It doesn't care about what happens to the body, not really. It just wants to be right. It wants to be able to complete its cycle of satisfaction. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's good or bad. It's just that's how it's designed. It's a machine. It's the equivalent of a virus and not a bacteria. It needs a host in order to reproduce. So now you can just move into saying, I'm not going to be your host anymore. And then thoughts just become completely innocuous, suggesting, oh, green, blue, warm, take it or leave it, objective. Yes, thank you, Kathy. Nice to see you here. Appreciate all of you so much. Thank you for joining me today, and hope to see you again. If you are interested in satsang, been meaning to put that together, thinking about doing satsang in an upcoming weekend. It's just been a little bit of delay. I can explain some of that more if you're curious, but it's probably a good time to do satsang if you guys want to ask some live questions. So please reach out. Let me know if you want to do it. If the numbers are appropriate, I'll just put it together. Most likely on a Saturday or a Sunday, from anytime from maybe 10 a.m. to noonish is when it will begin Mountain Time. If that works for you, reach out and let me know. So grateful for all of you. Thank you for lending me attention, energy, sharing, love, appreciation, compassion, brilliance, sadness, whatever these things seem to be. Thank you for sharing so much. Appreciate you, and look forward to our next session. Bye.